Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, April 2nd, 2021, and today I'm going to be talking about Joe Manchin and pretty much just discuss the April Fool's video that I made yesterday because we want to talk about what could actually happen if Joe Manchin was to switch political parties. Now, before we get into it, I want to say that yesterday, with my video that I posted, it was not true at all. So if you believed it, I apologize for that. I tried to drop numerous hints in the video, the description box, and in the comment section that indicated that I was not being serious. It also was on April 1st. So, if you did think that it was real, I apologize for that. I did not mean to confuse anybody. It was just meant to be a momentary joke that you would have realized was not necessarily true in the beginning. But of course, I do try to have a very credible news feed here on my channel, so I apologize if it was believable. And the reason why I did it was partially because it was something that was believable, because Joe Manchin has been one of the few Democrats that's been holding up key pieces of legislation, one of the few Democrats opposed to abolishing the filibuster. So it would necessarily be, of anyone in the Senate, believable, but it was just meant to be a small little prank. But I can understand how it could be very stressful, considering how polarized we are as a nation and how the Senate is down to 50-50, where this truly could have changed partisan control. But that leads me into this video, where what could actually happen if Joe Manchin was to switch political parties. And before we actually switch him on this map, let's talk briefly about why he could actually see some type of incentive to flip. Now, I don't think he will. First of all, he has quashed all rumors of him running as a Republican in 2024 or switching political parties. Jim Justice, the incumbent Republican governor here in West Virginia, said there's no chance that Joe Manchin switched his parties. He said that 2 months ago. Joe Manchin has also said on numerous occasions he is a Democrat. He has a lot of resentment for the GOP. Keep that in mind. There is no reality really where Joe Manchin is going to switch political parties. Unless something drastically changes, this isn't going to be one of those scenarios. Joe Manchin is still a Democrat at heart. He still votes with the Democratic Party in many ways. There are certain things where he does defer, but I'm telling you now, Joe Manchin has said and time again that he's not switching political parties, and his dislike for the GOP is very strong. Very, very strong. But why is Joe Manchin this one Democrat that we are looking at that, if anyone was to flip, why would it be him? Well, first things first, FiveThirtyEight released this very interactive tool where you can pretty much go through each senator and each representative and look at the way they voted relative to what Donald Trump supported, relative to what the Democratic Party supported. And they track it for every single senator that was in under Trump's administration, which means you're going to see a list of over 100. And of course, the Republican Party backed him at the highest level simply because they are from Republican states. It makes sense that they were going to back him the most. But you see, here's the thing. When you're looking at this tracking Congress in the age of Trump map, I've sorted it by the percent often that a senator votes with the GOP or with Donald Trump. And what you'll notice, of course, is it's all Republicans down to a certain point. And then it starts to drop. And the first Democrat on this list is Heidi Heitkamp. Well, she was not reelected in 2018. She's out. So then it's Joe Donnelly. Well, he was also ousted by Mike Braun in 2018. So who's next? It's Joe Manchin from West Virginia. In fact, Joe Manchin has voted with the GOP more than he's voted with the Democratic Party under President Trump. And that makes sense. If you're looking at the presidential election results in West Virginia, Donald Trump won nearly 70% of the vote. It's very clear in this state that he's a very popular president, or was a very popular president. And if you're looking at the 2018 results for West Virginia, Joe Manchin won a lot more counties than Biden, more being not zero, and Joe Manchin was able to win with nearly 50% of the vote. But the thing is here, that Joe Manchin, almost lost in 2018. And, some people might argue he would have more of an incentive to switch to the GOP and run for re-election. And considering, we have seen someone in West Virginia do that before, I'll show you in just a moment, maybe that makes sense. But again, Joe Manchin has said time and time again he will not switch political parties. And there's also history behind party switches in a 50-50 Senate as recently as in the 21st century under President George W. Bush. But let's take a look at West Virginia in 2016. Donald Trump won nearly 70% of the vote again. This is 2020. Donald Trump won nearly 70% of the vote in 2016. Hillary Clinton won 26%. Trump won every single county. It was a blowout across the state. But in the governor result, Jim Justice won. He won by 7 points as a Democrat. Yes, we have seen a Democrat elected statewide besides Joe Manchin in 2016 with Jim Justice. But not even a year into his term, Jim Justice switched political parties. Rather than serve as a Democrat, he switched to the Republican Party, citing his support for President Trump and the GOP, and saying the Democratic Party no longer represents how he stands. And looking at 2020, what we see in West Virginia is that rather than Jim Justice, number one, be primaried in a Republican primary, but he won re-election not by 7, but by a landslide. Jim Justice won with 63.5% of the vote to the Democrats' 30.2%. Some people thought it would be initially competitive. I had my own reservations about whether or not the GOP would actually have a landslide in this scenario because Jim Justice seemed to be that party switcher. Harlan Specter didn't do too well as a Democrat coming from the GOP. In fact, he probably would have lost more than Joe Sestak did. But looking at Jim Justice here, he was a success story. Rather than be ousted by the Republican Party, he was fully embraced by President Trump and the Trump wing. And in 2020, Joe Manchin actually didn't shy away from considering endorsing Trump for re-election, even though Trump had endorsed Patrick Morrissey in 2018 and vehemently campaigned against him. So Joe Manchin is very much an opportunist, but I don't think it makes sense for him to switch to the GOP, because then he loses all leverage. You see, he has worked his way up within the Democratic Party as that conservative Democrat that comes through when it really matters. He's the chairman of the energy section for the Democratic Party in the United States Senate. He has power. If he was to join the GOP, he'd be one of the most liberal members in the United States Senate as a Republican. So rather than have this tiebreaker status, which he could very well have if he was in a 51-49 scenario, chances are they would be able to pressure him into lower level positions and pretty much tell him, you have never really been a Republican. Thanks for joining us. You gave us the majority back. But at the end of the day, your vote will matter, but the Republicans will have control and they will be able to do certain things without Joe Manchin. But you see, just looking at this party switch, now let's go ahead and see what it does. It puts the Republicans at 51 to the Democratic Party's 49. Well, where does this, what does this remind me of? Well, back in the 107th Congress, you might remember this was the last time the Democratic Party was, not the Democratic Party, where the United States Senate was at a 50-50 tie until June of 2001. You see, what happened here was that we were in a very similar scenario. For the first few months, it looked good for the GOP. They had a 50-50 tie. They had the majority here. Dick Cheney was the vice president. He was the president of the Senate. The Senate majority was with the GOP. But then came one senator, Jim Jeffords from Vermont. Now, looking at what he did, he was a Republican, but he left the GOP, became an independent, and caucused with the Democratic Party. And that was huge. It was huge. Because of this flip, the entire Senate completely got uprooted. Because of this flip, we saw the Democratic Party return to being in Senate control, return to being in a position of power. And if you're looking at why this actually happened, this was released with the LA Times back in 2001, nearly 20 years ago. We see that the reason why he did this was because he was upset with the national GOP. He no longer agreed with them as much. He said he could never be a Democrat. Actually, down here, I can never be a Democrat, but I could be an independent. And that's what happened. Rather than register as a Democrat, he registered as an independent and joined the Democratic Party. And that's what Joe Manchin technically could do, but he probably won't. But in the event that he does do that, what this would do is change the majority here. Senate majority went from the Democrats until January 20th, 2001, because Al Gore was the vice president. And then the Republicans, with Dick Cheney as the vice president, held Senate control for nearly 5 months. And then here comes the 6 months, right? Or maybe I'm making a mistake here. But what happens here, I think that actually is 6 months. I don't know why I messed it up. But then the Democrats regained control leading into the 2002 midterms from June 6th onward. Now, if you're wondering what actually happened here, I saw that someone had mentioned that the Senate laws, the rules here require the majority to be won through an election. But that's not what happened here in the 107th Congress. So I'm sure that the Congress we have right now would follow historical precedent in this scenario. But let's take a look and see what actually happened here and who was in control. Well, in the leadership, the president of the Senate is not going to change because that's decided by a presidential election. Just because the Democrats are in the majority in this scenario, Dick Cheney was still the president of the Senate. But the president pro tempore changed. It was Robert Byrd, then it was Strom Thurmond, and then it was Robert Byrd again. Very interesting to see. And then if you're looking at the Republican leadership here, what you'll notice is that the minority leader was the Republicans. The minority whip, Republicans, right? The Democrats, majority leaders, majority whip. Harry Reid. I think it's Tom Daschle or Daschle, or I'm going to say Daschle. But if you're looking at it, the Republicans were the majority for a brief period of time and then cut short because of this party switch. So yes, the leadership would change. The majority whip, the minority whip. The majority leader, the minority leader would change. We would see a flip here. And then control would actually change. Control would change in terms of assignments and in terms of how the Senate does proceed. Because Jim Jeffords doing this really screwed over the GOP. It really did. And then it also says down here that the Republicans won back control due to the death of Democrat Paul Wellstone and the special election loss of Democrat Gene Carnahan. But since the body was out of session, the formal reorganization was delayed until the next Congress. So the Democrats just held that majority. They held that majority because of one senator from Vermont. Isn't that interesting? So looking at our current Senate breakdown, if you're looking at why this would be so impactful, it truly would change the way that our Senate does convene. But I don't think Joe Manchin is going to do it. Even though he may have voted with President Trump more times than he's voted with the Democratic Party, he still voted against President Trump 49% of the time. No Republican even comes close to being that low. Cynthia Lummis is only down here because she had a handful of votes. She was elected for 2 weeks into Trump's term. And obviously no Republicans down this point. Bill Hagerty, I guess, newly elected, but, not in there long enough to actually get a Trump score. So when you're looking at the tracking Congress numbers here, what you'll notice is that essentially, all it is just the GOP overwhelmingly voting for Trump, the Democratic Party overwhelmingly voting against him, and then those middlemen, which are mainly Democrats because they come from conservative states. Not many Republicans come from liberal states, and besides Susan Collins, but votes with Trump a lot. But looking at the numbers here, Joe Manchin, 50.4%. So essentially, Joe Manchin was just someone who backed the Republican Party, but is still at heart a Democrat. Has answered numerous questions about this and said, I'm still a Democrat. That, telling the people that he's still going to characterize himself with the Democratic Party. But in the event that does happen, there is a historical precedence that if it does happen, even as late as June, possibly even beyond that, it really just depends on whether or not everyone's in session. We would see the entire party shift. Mitch McConnell would go back to being majority leader. We would see Chuck Schumer go back to be minority leader. It would be short-lived for the Democratic Party, but Joe Manchin is simply not Jim Jeffords. Jim Jeffords has had heavy reservations in the past. Unfortunately, has passed away now, but had heavy reservations about the Republican Party. And Joe Manchin, while has had certain reservations, still backs the Democratic Party on many things. Every Republican in Congress voted against the American Rescue Plan. Joe Manchin did not. Not many Republicans, if any, support DC statehood. Some support Puerto Rico statehood, but that's different. But Joe Manchin, while not super accepting of DC statehood, seems to be coming around on a lot of major issues because he realizes that the Democratic Party needs him now more than ever. And while he could use that as leverage, he would not gain as much by joining the GOP. Because truly, I think that, even if Joe Manchin does join the GOP in 2024, I don't think he's going to be the next Jim Justice. He's going to be primaried, or he's just going to retire from politics entirely. And then it would be all for nothing. Pleasing his constituents is one thing, but completely betraying the party that elected him is the other. And I think that that's going to counteract his consideration of party flipping. Because if he did come from, a state that was never going to reelect him, he has been reelected twice. I'll show you his 2012 numbers. He was reelected twice. Looking at West Virginia, Manchin won with 60.5% of the vote. Manchin is still liked in West Virginia. Even though he voted to convict President Trump, even though he's voted against President Trump 49% of the time, he still has some base here, which is why he was able to win in 2018. And I get it. 2018 was supposed to be a blue wave year. And in a sense, it was in the House of Representatives and in the governorships and in many Senate elections. Arizona and Nevada were picked up by the Democrats. It was not surprising to see the GOP pick up Indiana, North Dakota, Missouri, right? But looking at West Virginia here with Joe Manchin, he still retained this base. West Virginia, out of all of the states, should not have gone to the Democratic Party. But Joe Manchin was one of the Democrats that came from the most conservative state, and he still held on. So Joe Manchin is doing quite fine as a Democrat. And while he may be limiting the Democratic Party in many ways, he's offering them a lot more than if he was a Republican. Because history tells us that the Republican Party would be able to win back all of these, win back control, and they would be able to lead as the majority party in at least our current Congress. So looking at what could happen, I think the Democrats are thankful that Joe Manchin hasn't considered this as an option, has shot this down as a rumor that's been circulating since 2010. He may be a conservative, but as he says it, he's a good old-fashioned West Virginia conservative Democrat. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.